The number you have reached, 911, has been changed to a non-published number.
Good day and welcome to today's LawCast. What I'm going to talk about today are two different topics. The first is going to be a review of a show that I've just discovered on Court TV called Las Vegas Law, which I think is an interesting show. And second of all is going to be a letter from a law student asking me where he should practice criminal law. The first thing we're going to talk about today is a show that I found this week on Court TV called Las Vegas Law. I don't know if it's a new show or I assume it's a series because it was a half-an-hour show and they were hyping it pretty big. So I think it's going to be on every week on Tuesdays. It follows a man by the name of Bucky Buchanan through his, pretty much everyday travails through the courts in Las Vegas. It's interesting in that you see some of the more interesting situations which, as a law student, you never really, you don't get the flavor for until you're actually in court. For instance, the circumstances where a couple times where he's dealing with judges. First one here is the judge, and I'm going to play this clip here so you can hear it, where she talks about the alleged crime.
Because the insurance issue, both insurance companies are battling odds end, and I'd like to get a criminal case which will resolve the civil case. One person was killed.
Yeah, this was the one they were racing on Sahara, allegedly. I didn't know the news.
And here's another situation where there's another judge, and he is going through a sentencing situation, and he's about, or he wants to reject the normal sentencing, and he's looking through, and he's gone through the defendant's record and made notes on the record. This is on it, and what he's looking at here is, and I don't know what the law is in Las Vegas. I'm pretty sure it's the same as it is here, because I think it would be a violation of due process to do it elsewise. But he's counting things against the defendant, or he very much appears to be counting things against the defendant, of which he was not convicted.
Richard, your plea of guilty. You're a judge guilty of possession of controlled substance felony. Ms. Smith?
Your Honor, pursuant to negotiations, we've agreed to make no recommendation.
Mr. Buckingham, what do you have to say?
Just asking for that one chance. They call you One Chance Mosley. I just want my one chance.
One Chance Mosley? Is that what they call me?
Go ahead.
It's coincidentally, somebody said it was More Time Mosley they called me. I'm not sure which did it. Well, Mr. Buckingham, in all candor, I wrote here, thief, on the count. I didn't do thief. I wrote that to remind me of my impression when I read the report. And you are 42 years old, is that correct?
Yes.
It's just one robbery, grand larceny, petty larceny, possession of stolen vehicle after another.
Are you sure that's I don't think that's my record, sir.
Michael John Buffington. Born May 23rd, 1963.
Yeah, I don't have that robbery, grand larceny, sir.
1989, robbery. Who was reduced to battery.
May I explain, Your Honor?
Yeah?
It was a bar fight. This guy beat up one of my friends, and I proved that I was innocent.
You didn't prove you were innocent. It was reduced to battery, and you paid a fine plus $500 in restitution. 1993, pled guilty to petty larceny. Remember that?
What?
1995, attempt auto burglary. Pled to tampering with a vehicle. March of 1995, possession of stolen vehicle. Reduced to a misdemeanor. June 1995, citation petty larceny. October 1995, possession of stolen vehicle. 2003, domestic violence. 6 days in jail. Remember that?
May I explain, Your Honor?
Yeah.
That was just, I didn't hit anybody. It's just like against the law. Anybody.
If I don't step in, this guy's going to bury himself.
Yeah, there, I remember that.
Yeah, that's enough.
Mr. Buchanan, what you're thinking?
I'm thinking that no one knows the law better than Judge Mosley, but he's forgotten a key provision. It doesn't matter how bad Michael's been in the past, because this is about possession of a controlled substance. It's called PCS, and the law mandates probation for first-time offenders.
Well, my thinking, Your Honor, is that it is any offering. This is a PCS. I believe it's mandatory probation.
Well, Mr. Buffington, if your attorney's right, and he usually is, I hate to admit that, the point is you are going to be given probation by operation of law. The other point to be made is that it's a one-time deal in this court. Do you understand that? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
And so what happens if you fail is you just serve your time. In this case, it's going to be 3 years. Do you understand? Yes, sir. A sentence is 36 months in prison, eligible for up to 12 months. Sentence is suspended and probation granted for an indeterminate period of time, not to exceed 3 years. The conditions of probation are you'd make yourself available for search. Your person, your vehicle, your residence. You would be amenable to substance abuse counseling. Urine samples may be required. You'll do 16 hours of community service for each month that you're on probation, and you'll maintain full-time employment. And you understand this is a one-time deal. Good enough. Good luck to you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
It's interesting, and I think we've all seen this if we've done sentencing hearings where the judge is looking at your client's record. Well, of course, mind you, and I'm sure this judge would too in Las Vegas, but the judges that I practice with, I've heard more than once, objection, Your Honor. The fact that he was charged with murder 12 times in 1992 is not relevant since all but one of them were dismissed and the 12th charge was reduced to assault and battery with 2 weekends in jail. Why, yes, Mr. Lammers, of course I understand, and this court is not going to count anything in his record of which he was not convicted against him, because that would violate his rights as a citizen of the United States, and we would never do such a thing, Mr. Lammers. Which, and most of the time I will say that the judges are saying that with a straight face, and I'm sure mean it. And even if they didn't, the judge could be being the most sarcastic person in the world, and by the time it gets to the circuit court and it's just in a transcript, those words sound golden, or read golden, because the circuit court, or the Court of Appeals, is not going to hear the tone. So that's another circumstance that you kind of have to get used to when you practice. And beyond that, I did want to talk about, obviously, those who work in Las Vegas make a lot more money than I do in Richmond, Virginia area practicing criminal law. Now, first of all, I want to show you, this is my office. And here are a couple pictures of Mr. Buchanan's office. Now, besides noting the fact that Mr. Buchanan is obviously neater than I am, or at least he's neater than I am when he knows the television is going to be on, I look at his office. Holy cow! Panels, nice paneling on the walls. Just extremely well set up. Someday, inshallah, someday, but not today. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've discussed enough of this. I think this comes on every Tuesday night at 10 o'clock. I recommend it for everybody. For those of us who are, practicing, I think we'll get a kick out of it. For those of you who are in law school or contemplating doing some sort of work with the law, I think it gives you a feel for what goes on in the courtroom and how things actually work. And I think it's a pretty good show. And since I don't think a lot of shows are very good about the courtroom, I think that's saying a little bit for me. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I think that closes this subject, and now we move on to the next. So what we're going to discuss now is the letter about where someone should practice criminal law. And this comes from TH, and I'll read it to you so that you know what I'm responding to. Mr. Lammers, having read your blog, I wonder if you might offer an opinion regarding the practice of criminal law. I'm a second-year law student at What's the Matter You, and I have a great deal of interest in practicing criminal defense law in the future. The problem is, I'm unsure where I want to do this. I could live anywhere. I am single and highly mobile. Nonetheless, when I do choose a location, I would like to stay there, build my practice, and maybe even have a family. My question to you is this. If you were in my shoes, where would you choose to practice criminal law? I assume that certain jurisdictions are jammed with high criminal attorney to criminal defendant ratios while others are not. I assume that some jurisdictions are more defense-friendly than others. Would you suggest a big city or a small town? My long-term goals include having a successful small, perhaps even solo, criminal defense firm. I would like to make a comfortable living doing something that I enjoy. Thanks, T.H. Okay. Well, let's start out. Let's break down what practice is going to be like in different areas. And I have practiced a little bit in Richmond, which is a medium-sized city. I've practiced a little bit in, well, a lot in the suburbs around Richmond, or south of Richmond. And I've practiced in rural counties a fair amount. So let me kind of describe what I think that your business is going to be like in these different areas. If you want to go to a rural county, you're probably not going to be able to survive on criminal law. It's just not going to happen. You're going to have to be a general practitioner. You're going to have to do some sort of PI or domestic work or real estate or something to make ends meet, because there's generally not going to be enough criminal work going on. There'll be a fair amount of traffic work, mind you, depending on how rural your county is. If your county doesn't even have any major state roads going through it, there might not even be the significant amount of criminal or traffic work for you. So the 3-4 attorneys in your county, or that are between the 3 or 4 counties in your circuit, are probably going to, be able to handle most of it, and it's just not going to be enough to stretch for one person or 2 people to have all criminal law practices. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. The rural communities are usually pretty nice places, good people. Once you get, well, as long as you don't manage to piss people off, they're good people. The general practitioner part's not all that bad. I mean, you can do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I find a lot of people who do criminal law tend to pick up a little bit of civil work anyway because, well, it pays. So another option is the suburbs. Or, the suburbs in general are an okay place to practice criminal law. They are not flooded with crimes, or at least not extremely serious crimes. They usually have a tough-on-crime type of atmosphere, so that what you end up with is crimes which would never get prosecuted in the city get prosecuted in the suburbs. And the suburbs have enough money to have, say, special units such as drug task force, which the rural communities don't have. So, there's going to be a fair amount of business, but you're going to end up doing some of the most silly things you've ever seen in your life. Cases like residue cases, which happen all the time in the county where I primarily practice, where they take a pipe, glass pipe, or whatever, and they scrape the residue off of it and turn it into the lab, which the lab then, the main question is whether there was enough for them to analyze. The lab analyzes it, say, yes, this burnt substance was cocaine or was heroin, and they then convict people for possession. You see that in the suburbs, whereas in the city, the officer who's doing a shakedown on somebody and finds the glass pipe usually pretty much just throws it down the sewer rather than pursuing that charge. So, you'll end up with a lot of charges along those lines. And then you got your city practice. Well, the city practice, if it's a medium to or above city, is probably going to be able to stand on its own. There's going to be while there will be fairly large number of people who are actually practicing criminal law in the city, there's going to be, in most cases, enough crime for them to be able to practice. It's just a reality of life. The cities have the crime. And let me say this. You may think, well, I'll locate my office in the suburbs and still practice in the city. Nah, it don't work. Because what happens is the people in the city, the world ends at the edge of the city. Believe me, you could be 5 minutes beyond the edge of the city and they won't come to your office because you're not in the city. So that's something you got to consider. And I think you can do a decent criminal practice while you're in the city. It's much easier to specialize. Now, let me say there are other factors you got to consider in. First of all, before you go somewhere to practice, find out what the local atmosphere is. For instance, if you think you might want to practice in Cincinnati, Ohio, you think you might want to practice in, Philadelphia, and you think you might want to practice in Los Angeles. 3 places which I know nothing about, and this is why I bring these up. Check to see what the situation's like there. Is there a public defender's office? Well, I'd bet money in each one of those locations there's a public defender's office. Cincinnati, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles are all large communities. They probably have one. Okay, fine. How much does the public defender's office take of the criminal law business? Does it take every single felony and every single misdemeanor that's indigent? Because if it does, and you're a single practitioner trying to start out, there ain't going to be a whole lot of the slices of the pie left for you. You're not going to be the guy who's going to have somebody walking in off the street and offering him $10,000 to represent him because you're new. And the court-appointed work, which is what you need to get going, ain't going to be there because, well, short of conflicts, the public defender's office is taking all of them. Now, that's probably extreme. I doubt there are many places where the public defender's office handles everything. But get a feel for it. Find out what it is. Second of all, find out what court-appointed work pays like. Because unless you just come by some miracle really quickly, you're going to end up doing court-appointed work. So, if you need to find out whether or not you can make a living off of it. So check into that, see, if it's as low as Virginia is, or if it's fairly decent paying, and kind of get a feel for that as well. You might want to also talk to some local attorneys. Well, you should probably be talking to local attorneys about all of this, but kind of get a feeling for, how cliquey it is. Has nobody but the top 5 attorneys or the judge's favorite 5 attorneys gotten a felony charge assigned to them in the last 10 years? That's important information to know. Just kind of check into those things. Now let me say this. I understand, although it was not my initial choice to start in a law firm on my own, I understand kind of the desire to do it, to prove yourself, to get there, and I did it my way, right? Well, let me say this as a matter of the way things work. First of all, solo practitioner, you don't get economy of scale. It's not necessarily the greatest thing in the world because of that. I'm a big believer that law firms, at least law firms where there's enough business for it, should probably have 3 to 4 lawyers in them at least, so that you can all afford to pay the receptionist or secretary. You can all afford to, the rent gets split 4 ways rather than 1. Bills get split rather than going to one person. electricity, phones, etc. So, that's something you want to think about a little bit. But if you're bound in turn to be a solo practitioner, well, before you become a solo practitioner, there are a couple other things I think you should consider as well. First is, should you work for a public defender's office first, or should you try to become another attorney's associate first? I would recommend either of these ways. Now, public defender's office is going to be a place where you're going to get an amazing amount of experience. You're going to run into some very dedicated attorneys who know what they're doing and who've seen everything at least 10 times, who are going to be able to tell you what works and what doesn't. It will, at least in a certain area, get you exposed to the judges and the prosecutors in that area, and it will get you, a lot of work. Now, what that kind of work will be is probably going to depend on how the public defender's office is set up. If the public defender's office is set up so that newbies do traffic the first year, that might not be the greatest thing in the world. But in larger cities, at least, my feeling is that public defenders, in the amount of time I've been practicing, have handled a lot more serious and more serious cases than I have. Probably within 2 years, handled the same sorts of cases that I took 3 to 4 years to get the judges to assign to me. So, that's something you got to consider. The option of getting hired as an associate by somebody is not a bad idea, especially if you can get hired by somebody who's, Mr. Big High Muckety Muck attorney who's been practicing in the city or the county for the last 35 years, who's highly respected and who doesn't take any cases which are, he doesn't take any cases unless he gets at least $10,000 down at the beginning. That sort of guy. Now, you can fit a role in his office as the guy who gets the $5,000 or $7,000 cases. And, when Mr. High Muckety Muck can't take the case and he sends it down to you because it's a $5,000 case rather than $10,000 case, well, to you, that's a great way to get going. And you might stay with him for 20 years, become a partner or something. Or you might stay with him 2 or 3 years, have established your own reputation, and step out on your own. Kind of a choice of what you feel like works. It's not a bad way to go, and as a matter of fact, I would tell you that if you start out doing that kind of work and get a reputation for doing, being the attorney that they come to and pay $5,000 and all that, the odds are that you'll get more of that kind of business. If you start doing court-appointed work, you get more of that kind of business. You can kind of stay there. That's the ways you're going to start out. If you're going to do a solo practice, unless something really breaks your way, you're going to be doing a lot of court-appointed work. So check into the court-appointed system, like I said before, and see what you can do with it, how much it pays, if it pays enough to make it viable to keep an office open. I really can't recommend Virginia for this very reason. It's difficult with the amount of money that they pay on court appointments to really make an office viable as a solo. I think that you might be able to do it with economy of scale, 2 or 3 people, but as a solo it's more difficult. Now, I think that I've answered most of the questions you had. Choose a location that you're interested in, because you're going to be practicing there for a while. Unless you want to take another bar, you're going to be pretty much stuck in that area. And particularly after you've been there for a couple of years and made a reputation for yourself, hopefully a good one, so that if, 3-4 years down the road, you think you've made a wrong choice, Well, unless you want to now go take the California bar or take the Ohio bar or whatever, you're probably stuck in the state you're in. So, and yes, I know about reciprocity and all that, but you'll be surprised how many states don't reciprocate each other. So make sure that you've looked into where you want to practice at, and it's a place you'll be happy living. As a single guy, you might want to consider some place where you can set up a practice in the city, live in the city in whatever the local yuppie town is, and then, once married and with the rugrats on the way, you can move to the county where there's good schools and a better place to raise families, right? So, and keep your office in the city. It's something you want to consider along those lines. As far as rural, if you establish yourself in a rural community, those court-appointed fees, which, like for instance in Virginia, the court-appointed fees, which just aren't really all that great here in the Richmond area, are probably a lot better as you get further from the major cities, where you're in a more rural area. But again, and like I say, your problem is going to be that there's probably a lot less business there. So, can you really make it on that? You got to kind of look into it and think about it. One thing I want to address that you actually talked about is, are certain areas more defense friendly than others? Yes, they are. Generally, your cities are more defense friendly than the suburbs or the rural areas. The cities have got a docket from hell that they've got to push through, so they can't afford to be trying every one of those cocaine charges, because they got things like murders and rapes they got to deal with. They can't afford to be spending a whole heck of a lot of time on your cocaine charge. So they're gonna do what they're gonna do. They're gonna make deals with you, work out pretty well, and then even if you end up taking a jury trial, in the city, the odds are you're going to end up with juries that have communities which are more sympathetic to your client, whether they be poorer communities that live in the city, or the cities also tend to have more liberal communities in them as well. So there'll be more of a likelihood the community is going to be friendly to your client. Personally, I practice in what would be a harder set of jurisdictions. I practice in primarily suburban and rural areas, so the jurisdictions here are harder. And everybody knows that. The prosecutors know that they don't have to make as good of deals. The judges aren't as friendly. Now, mind you, even in the cities, depending on who's appointing judges, they aren't necessarily as friendly to your client, but the difference is probably the jury pool. You get out into the rural communities and the suburbs, well, the juries ain't going to be as friendly to your client. They're just not going to be. And like I say, law and order communities, and they're just not going to be as friendly. It makes things a lot more interesting. I think it makes things a lot more interesting. But I'm not sure that friendliness of the system in a certain area should be something that really influences your choice to practice somewhere. Sure, you'd like to win a lot more than you would if you were in the suburbs or rural areas, but it doesn't mean that your practice quality is going to be a whole lot better. It's just kind of something you got to feel out for yourself. Anyway, I think that I've kind of touched on most of the topics that you asked about, TH. Don't know if I was the most organized answers that you've heard ever, but I hope it was a little bit helpful. And if you got any further questions, feel free to drop me an email, and anybody else here who wants to leave a message for TH, explain to him what they think about practicing here, there, and elsewhere. I'm going to put a post up that's going to say, today's video blog is up, and anybody who wants to post something to TH, post it after here, and you're free to do anything, post anything you want there. And that's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you for listening. Hope you had some enjoyment out of this, and hopefully I'll get another one up next week. As I always say, this is not something that you should be quoting to a judge. This is extemporaneous, not researched, not prepared in any way, and if you quote me to a judge, you should probably have yourself checked to see if you're competent to be in a courtroom. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed it. See you next week.